Hi. 3 months ago, I uploaded Neurostasis, my biggest Geometry Dash project yet. If you've been subscribed to me for a while, you probably know that I usually type long descriptions with my comments on the level in the video. I couldn't fit everything I wanted to say about Neurostasis in the description of its video, so I just typed out some general thoughts I had surrounding the level instead. I wasn't really satisfied with that, so I've been thinking of making a video like this for a while, just covering everything I want to say about it, so here it is. One night in the Insane Demonless Discord server, I was looking for songs to make a level with for some reason. After a bunch of unserious suggestions, my friend Zuzer suggested Hide by Laps, and I liked what I heard, so I started making a layout with it the same night. Whenever I make a layout, I always put the game mode portals and speed changers down before I start making the gameplay. I started off by putting down alternating cube and robot portals for every hit in the song in the first part, and I thought Chip would be a good choice for the part after it, because the song slows down and doesn't have much of a rhythm to follow going into it. I was looking for where I should end the ship part, and it was only then when I realized just how good the progression of the song was after not really paying attention to it on my first listen. The part just kept on going and going, so I decided that the main gimmick for the level would be a ship part that lasts for the entirety of that part of the song. From there, I started coming up with a theme and story for the level, which we'll cover later, to match the growing intensity in the song. I knew right away that this would become my best level yet. I started building the actual gameplay, and I restricted myself to only using a single structure type for the entire first part, except for this one that I only realized didn't fit the pattern until way later, which I kept anyways because it fit the theme I was trying to make. As with all of my gameplay, or most of my gameplay, I tried to make it thought-provoking and fun to figure out, while keeping it as enjoyable to play as I could. Then came the ship part. I had a rough time trying to figure out my plan for the gameplay here, so I ended up taking a 3-month-long break to think about it, while I finished Decay and worked on Inane Demon. You can see here in the description of Decent Cold Sweat No Clip Run Do Read Desk that the two levels I was talking about here were Neurostasis and Inane Demon. When I finally came back to it, I had a plan to start the part off with the most basic structuring and gameplay I could make, and slowly turn it into an overwhelming and chaotic mess. So I started off the slow part of the ship with only blocks, orbs, and portals. In the one-time speed part, I added pads and made the gameplay bouncier. Then I added spikes and a couple of portals and pads that could kill you in the 2-time speed part. Next I added slopes and a couple of fake orbs in the 3-time speed part. I felt like the 4-time speed part was a turning point in the song, so I added passable gaps in the structures and long spike corridors along with sharp slopes and additional fake orbs that aren't in the player's way, unlike how they are in the 3-time speed part. In the final half of the 4-time speed part, I really wanted to overwhelm the player, so I added even more fakes, took away most of the long spike corridors, and added as many jerky moves as I could. Then all of a sudden the song slows, so I decided to make it the easiest part of the level for an extremely nerve-wracking reach for the end. In the end, I was super satisfied with this gameplay. The gimmicks I made in the first part were really fun to figure out. The 4-time speed ship was definitely the most enjoyable gameplay I'd ever made, while being super fun to rewatch as well. And the overall progression of everything in the ship matched the song exactly how I wanted it to. This layout got quite a lot of views compared to my other non-finished level videos after it was uploaded, and I was really happy about all the praise it got, so I knew I had to match the gameplay with the best decoration I'd ever made. While listening to Hide, I got dreamlike vibes from the part where I started the ship, so after brainstorming ideas and themes I could use to capture it in the level, I came up with the idea of some sort of brain experiment that the player is going through. I made this theming pretty subtle and I'm not sure if anybody actually picked up on it, but let me know if you did. In the beginning, the player starts off in a weird and shadowy world, with upside down trees and glass shards coming down from the sky, a weirdly moving background, as well as some structures floating in midair. My goal with this part was to give the player a sense that something's wrong with what they're seeing, hinting at the fact that the player sometimes has problems perceiving things. The next part suddenly switches up to something that looks normal, and the player finds themselves in what looks like a laboratory where everything is right side up, the background isn't moving weirdly, the weird floating structures from before are suspended by wires. There also seems to be a substance that's radiating blue light in the structures. Throughout this part, some effects and glitches happen which are intended to tell the player that their vision is messing up, and that the experiment is in progress. The player then loses consciousness, and the view switches over to the inside of the brain, which is a pretty dull and slow-moving area right now. Here, these square things are meant to be something like neurons, and these shadowy things are meant to be afterimages of the light and glass things in the lab area. In the 1-time speed part, brain activity starts as the neuron-like things turn on, and arrows show the player the correct path to avoid the obstacles. In the 2x speed part, the background turns blue, and what looks like the substance seen in the lab before starts getting its way into the player's brain. Some spikes suddenly appear here and start blinking, which seems to indicate incoming danger. In the 3x speed part, the substance starts to have its effect on the brain as seen by the glitchy movement. The brain's defense mechanisms start to kick in with the triangles passing by in the background. In the 4x speed part, the brain starts to corrupt. The brain can't process things correctly anymore, and the arrows that were forming paths can no longer guide the player correctly. Long stretches of corruption seem to have overwritten the structures too. In the last half of the 4x speed part, the player's brain is in complete chaos. The player cannot think straight, and everything is out of order. The chaos shows no signs of stopping, but then comes the true purpose of the experiment: neurostasis. The chaos stops, everything freezes in place, and the corruption disappears, leaving empty holes in the structures. As the player progresses through this part, the brain slowly starts to recover itself. But it doesn't look quite the same as it did before. The brain is finally exited at the very end. A single question then remains: did the brain recover, or was it forever damaged in the experiment? Now I want to go through how I made some of the things in this level, because I think there are a lot of good ideas that can be taken away from it, even for experienced creators. First, we have this background in the first section that snaps into place at 3%. The first thing I did to make this was painstakingly create this in-place background with slopes, lines, and a lot of copy and paste. Next, I selected a larger chunk of it than I should have and moved it off to the side and found out how many objects were in that chunk. Then I randomly selected a third of those objects by clicking around until it got to about the total amount of objects in the chunk divided by 3, assigned them a new group, and put them on a different layer. I did this one more time for another third of the objects, and then assigned a new group to the remaining third. This is an easy random group assignment technique that I've used for a bunch of effects that I've made. Next, I created all of the movements I wanted for the background before 3% and made sure they all added up to 0. I also made random rotations on top of the move triggers, added up the total rotation for each group, and created rotate triggers that instantly rotate the groups to the negatives of the values I got to disassemble the background before the level starts. As you may be able to guess, this makes every movement and rotation add up to 0 by the end, resulting in the background being in place after 3%. I got this idea from this part in Afterlife by Nazgub with these destroyed blocks reforming, so shout out to that level. This is quite a simple effect that has a lot of applications, so go see what you can do with it. Next we have these trees. I had never really made anything like this before, but I was inspired by creators like Blee and Kiwi to try using random rock objects to recreate realistic things. I found this one rock object that looks like 2 leaves when you put 2 of them together, and this rock outline that works as a tree branch to build all of the trees. If you look closely, you can see that the leaves are swaying. I did this by putting the leaves on a group that rotates back and forth very slightly, which worked out nicely with their center points being in differing places because of the way they're made. Then there's the falling fragments. Each one of these fragments has 4 sizes: a random placement, a random rotation, a random flip, 1 of 4 fall speeds, 1 of 4 distances it can sweep back and forth, and 1 of 3 times it takes to sweep back and forth. Although some things are shared between fragments of the same size, this is an insane thing to manually make in the editor without it looking unnatural, so I didn't do that. Instead, I used the programming language that Sputniks made for Geometry Dash, Spawn, to place those objects and randomly assign groups to them using a bit of typing and brainpower to make this code you're seeing right now, so shout out to that for being an extremely useful tool. With all of the objects placed in groups assigned, all I had to do was a few tweaks to the fragments and set up the movements for each of the groups back in the editor. Now if you've seen my other levels, you know that I absolutely love making layering effects, so obviously I made some in this level too. The layering effect in this level is actually really simple. I just put these slopes in the structures, as well as the double layered 3D, on layers below and between the background slopes. Specifically in the first 3 parts of the ship, one layer of the background triangles is on B3, the other on B4, one layer of 3D on B2, the other on B4, and the slopes in the structure is on B3 behind one of the layers to the background triangles. Next we have the triangles that go across the background starting in the 3x speed part. This is actually a super cool effect that isn't showcased very well in this level, so I'll use this other example of it that I made before the one in Neurostasis. It works using the move to target option in the move trigger, and by making the target move up and down extremely fast, so the movement of each object is seemingly random. This probably isn't as useful now as it was in 2.1 because you can make something like this really easily with the particle editor, but I still think it's a good technique to know to easily vary the movements of multiple things. Also, after talking to Aimbotter about this effect, I decided that the target used in Neurostasis should be a text object that says Aimbotter smells. Here we have the glitchy blocks. These are made by rapidly rotating a bunch of these objects 90 degrees instantly. This is also how I made this effect in Decay. Consider doing this over frame by frame toggling like I've seen other people do for similar effects, because it's way easier and saves a bunch of objects. This particular design still took a lot of objects though, with 15 objects per block and about 13,000 in the level in total, but it still looks cool and doesn't lag, so who cares? In the last half of the 4x speed chip, the brightness of the background was tied to the height of the objects that were moving up and down to the music. It was extremely unnecessary to do that here, but it was done with collision blocks. The objects moving up and down follow the movements of this collision block, and the background color changes when that collision block hits another collision block's height. I got this idea from Klutz by Para, a banger level that uses it in a much more practical way by changing the color based on the player's height. I also used it in the ship part in Late a long time ago. Now you may be wondering how I made the progressively chaotic movements in the ship. The answer is, extremely easily. Most of it is done using this one spawn loop right here, some toggling between parts, and strategic group assignment. This loop has 3 layers to it, with each layer moving 3 groups up right and down left repeatedly. The only difference between each layer is the distance that each group moves being larger in the top layer and smaller in the bottom layer. The first and second layers are toggled off when the 3x speed part starts, and the 3 movement groups are assigned to the squares, randomly selected sections of the wiring in the background, and some of the orb decoration. When the 4x speed ship starts, the bottom layer of the spawn loop is toggled off and the middle layer is toggled on to make the movements bigger. The movement groups are also randomly assigned to these black blocks inside the long stretches of corruption. Finally, in the last half of the 4x speed part, the middle layer of the spawn loop is toggled off and the top layer is toggled on. The movement groups are also randomly assigned to sections of the structure outline effect. You can really see how much all of the spawn loops in the level are doing when you look at the entire 4x speed part in the editor, especially when you remove the structure movement and glitchy block toggling. The rest of the chaos is just from bouncy zooms on the structures in this collision block I mentioned before, as well as the enter and exit effects that creators often overlook. One last thing I should mention is how I removed the shake from the end wall to make the end screen look cleaner. It works by cancelling out the shake with another super small shake that is timed to play immediately after the end wall shake starts, because shakes can't stack. This was found by IMAX, so I'll leave a link to their tweet about it in the description that shows exactly how you can time it for your own levels. I mentioned a few places that I'd gotten inspiration from earlier, but here are the main inspirations for the whole idea of Neurostasis. The first one is in Persona 5 Royal, which is my favorite game of all time, right after Geometry Dash. From these horribly cropped but spoiler-free screenshots, you can probably tell that it heavily inspired the first Cuban robot section. The area fit the clean environment I was going for, and I thought it was just such a vibe with its color scheme, trees, falling particles, and lighting, so I tried to recreate that vibe in the level. Another inspiration for this level is the National Anthem by Gecko, my current and probably forever favorite level in the game. I've always liked it when levels have loose themes or stories around them without having any text or poorly made cutscenes in the level to explain what's happening, and I think the National Anthem is a phenomenal example of this, as well as being the inspiration for me to create my own level with subtle themes and a story. This level also has some of the most interesting chaos I've ever seen in a level, with its mess of movements and colors, which obviously inspired the 4x speed chip in Neurostasis. The last big inspiration for this level is specifically the wave in Cold Sweat, which is my favorite individual part in any level ever, and the cube after it. The wave just has such a great release of energy and intensity, as well as some super mesmerizing gameplay, which is something I've always wanted to replicate. It's also followed by a comparatively extremely easy cube at the end of the level, with some visual obstruction that really heightens your nerves, which inspired the part after the 4x speed chip. Not only did I take inspiration from other people's levels for Neurostasis, but I also tried to recreate some of the things I made in my 4 previous rated levels before this one, like the ship gameplay of Dreamer, the bouncy gameplay of Late, the tricolor system of Decay, and the chaos of Inane Demon. One person in the comments of the Neurostasis video actually noticed this, which was really cool. I just thought it was a nice and personal way for me to tie off the end of my 2.1 creating journey. You may know that before I released this level, I was on a crazy 4-level star raid only streak. Neurostasis finally gave me my first featured level about a month after I released it, and although it may sound a little selfish, I was still pretty disappointed that it wasn't epic rated. You can see that disappointment with the lack of expression I put in the edit at the end of the video's description. That didn't hurt me though, because I know that the value of my level isn't determined by its in-game rating, and I got a ton of praise for the level anyway after I uploaded it, which is way more important to me and something I'm really happy to have. Overall, making Neurostasis is one of the things I'm the proudest of in life, so thank you all for enjoying it. I just want to give another shout out to the playtesters for pointing out a bunch of the small annoyances in the gameplay, because it wouldn't be as good as it is without them. And I also want to give a shout out to all of the people who I've seen who have beaten it so far, especially to Aeon Air for gassing it up this hard for Seriously though, I really appreciate all of the support I've gotten over my years of creating, and I hope you're looking forward to what I make in 2.2 because I have a lot of levels planned. Thanks for watching.